When Nazi Germany surrendered in May 1945, more than 100 U-boats were still at sea. In the days that followed, they surfaced in quiet harbours across Europe, their war finally over. What came next was unprecedented. Hundreds of submarines captured, studied, and deliberately destroyed. This is what happened to the U-boats after World War II. On May 8, 1945, Germany signed its unconditional surrender. Within hours, Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's successor and former U-boat commander, issued a simple but historic order. All U-boats are to cease operations, surface, and surrender to the nearest Allied authority. The long war beneath the Atlantic was over. Across the North Atlantic, the Bay of Biscay and the fjords of Norway, more than 150 U-boats surfaced, their exhausted crews hoisting white flags as Allied aircraft circled overhead. They sailed toward ports such as Loch Erebol in Scotland, Lisahalli in Northern Ireland, and Portland in southern England, each arrival marking the quiet collapse of the Wolfpack fleet that once haunted Allied shipping lanes. The surrender process was tightly controlled, Allied warships escorting the submarines into port, where Royal Navy and US Navy boarding parties seized codes, charts, and weapons. Engineers catalogued the rusted, battle-scarred vessels, many barely seaworthy after months underwater. At Loch Erebol, nearly 40 U-boats anchored together in a grim parade of defeat. The logistics were immense, towing and securing submarines from across occupied Europe. A few never made it, scuttled or lost to mechanical failure before reaching port. In the following weeks, Allied leaders faced a pressing question: what to do with the world's most advanced submarine fleet. The United States and Britain saw immense intelligence value in the revolutionary Type 21 and Type 23 designs, while the Soviet Union, entering the early Cold War, demanded its share of the captured technology. Meanwhile, the captured German crews endured long months of captivity. Some were interrogated for intelligence, particularly engineers familiar with the new propulsion systems or torpedo technology. Others languished in camps, uncertain of their fates. By late 1945, most were repatriated to a defeated, divided Germany. By the year's end, harbours from Trondheim to Portsmouth were clogged with captured submarines. What came next, Operation Deadlight, would ensure that most of these machines never sailed again. By the autumn of 1945, the Allies had gathered more than 100 surrendered U-boats in British harbours. Keeping them afloat was costly, and storing them indefinitely was impossible. The Royal Navy therefore approved Operation Deadlight, a plan to tow the captured submarines out into the Atlantic and sink them. Between November 1945 and February 1946, this quiet operation would erase most of the Kriegsmarine's undersea fleet from existence. The logistics were daunting. In total, 156 U-boats had surrendered to the Allies, with 116 designated for destruction under Deadlight. The Royal Navy divided the operation into 3 dumping areas, XX, YY, and ZZ, roughly 100 to 120 nautical miles northwest of Ireland. There, the submarines would be sunk either by naval gunfire, explosive charges, or by simply opening their sea valves. The first phase began in November 1945, when Royal Navy tugs started towing groups of submarines from Scottish and Irish ports. But many of the U-boats were in dreadful condition. Some had been at sea for months without maintenance. Others were battered by Allied bombing or deliberate sabotage. Their ballast tanks leaked, their engines seized, and their hulls were weakened by rust. In stormy winter seas, towing these unstable wrecks was a hazardous task. As a result, more than a third of the U-boats never made it to the scuttling zones. 56 vessels foundered or sank on the way, dragged down by rough weather or structural failure. The Royal Navy recorded each loss but made little effort to recover them. Deadlight's purpose was destruction, not preservation. Once in position, destroyers and frigates finished the job. Crews sometimes used aerial rockets or naval gunfire to ensure the boats went under quickly. Among the doomed submarines was U-2336, the last U-boat to sink Allied ships during the war. It surrendered at Lisahalli in June 1945 and was deliberately sunk off Ireland in January 1946. Another, U-295, met the same fate on December 17, 1945, after being towed from Loch Ryan. Not all U-boats were destroyed. The most advanced examples, the Type 21 and Type 23 boats, were spared for study. These represented the future of submarine design, featuring streamlined hulls and improved underwater endurance. British and American engineers examined several of them closely, reverse engineering their technologies for their own post-war fleets. The U-2511, Germany's only fully operational Type 21 at the war's end, was scuttled last on February 7, 1946, marking the official conclusion of Operation Deadlight. For decades, the Deadlight wrecks lay forgotten on the seabed. Then between 2001 and 2003, maritime archaeologist Inez McCartney led expeditions that rediscovered many of them. Using sonar and deep-sea photography, his team identified at least 14 intact U-boat hulls, preserved in the cold Atlantic mud. The findings revealed how hastily the scuttlings had been carried out. Many boats sank upright, their decks still armed, their steel now encrusted with coral and history. Operation Deadlight had served its purpose to erase the physical presence of Hitler's U-boat fleet, yet its aftermath left an unintended legacy, a vast underwater graveyard stretching across the North Atlantic, silent testimony to the end of Germany's submarine war. While most of Germany's U-boats met their end in the North Atlantic, a select few survived. To the Allies, these submarines were more than wartime relics, they were technological blueprints that could redefine undersea warfare. Between 1945 and 1948, dozens of captured boats were retained, repaired, or distributed among the victorious powers, becoming test subjects in the dawn of the Cold War. To manage this process, the tripartite Naval Commission, formed in August 1945, allocated the surrendered fleet between the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. Each received 10 U-boats for examination, with priority given to the advanced Type 21 and Type 23 designs. Their streamlined hulls, greater battery capacity, and snorkel systems represented a revolutionary step. Submarines designed to fight primarily beneath the surface rather than above it. In Britain, the Royal Navy integrated several of these vessels for testing. U-3017, renamed HMS N41, underwent submerged trials and endurance runs before being scrapped in 1949. Others, such as U-190, surrendered off Newfoundland and were taken into Canadian service as training platforms for sonar and torpedo practice. The Royal Navy also captured hulls to refine depth charge tactics, detonating explosives near real German steel rather than mock targets. The United States took a similar interest. Captured submarines were studied extensively at naval facilities in Portsmouth and New London. Crews of the U.S. Submarine Force examined propulsion systems, silent running technology, and periscope design, features that would later influence America's post-war submarine classes. Particularly significant was U-234, a long-range cargo submarine captured on May 14, 1945, while en route to Japan with a secret payload that included uranium oxide and jet engine components. U.S. Navy engineers studied its construction and cargo before sinking it during weapons tests in 1947. Across Europe, other navies received their share. The Soviet Union acquired several of the prized Type 21 boats, which served as direct templates for the later Whiskey-class submarines. Soviet shipyards dissected German hulls plate by plate, replicating the pressure-resistant architecture and snorkel systems that gave their new fleet a sudden technological leap. To the west, it was a worrying development. The same German engineering that once hunted Allied convoys was now fueling an arms race beneath the Arctic ice. Smaller nations also benefited. France, rebuilding its navy after years of occupation, took over a few boats from Allied stockpiles. One of them, U-123, served for several years under a new flag before being decommissioned. Norway operated others for training and coastal patrol, while Denmark used German submarine technology in its post-war shipbuilding programs. Yet not every transfer was purely scientific. The redistribution of U-boats became an early symbol of post-war geopolitics. Britain and the United States hoped that sharing German technology would maintain balance among the Allies, but as the Soviet Union expanded its fleet, cooperation quickly turned into competition. The U-boats had changed owners, but their strategic value remained. By the end of the decade, most of the retained submarines had served their purpose and were deliberately sunk or dismantled. Still, their influence proved lasting. The innovations of the Type 21, its batteries, hydrodynamics, and underwater speed, became the design foundation for nearly every conventional submarine built through the 1950s. In a sense, Germany's final wartime invention became the blueprint for the nuclear age. While hundreds of U-boats were scuttled or scrapped, a handful escaped destruction and entered a new chapter. These survivors, scattered across Europe and North America, turned from weapons of war into artifacts of remembrance. Among the best known is U-995, a submarine that surrendered in May 1945 at Trondheim, Norway. It later served briefly in the Norwegian Navy before being returned to Germany in 1965. Today it rests at Labo near Kiel, preserved as a museum ship besides the Marine Ehrenmal Memorial. Visitors who step inside its narrow hull experience the oppressive quarters where 45 men once lived, worked, and fought for weeks at a time. In France, several captured U-boats were used in the post-war Navy. The U-123, renamed Blizon, became one of the few to see regular peacetime service. When retired, it was preserved in Lorient, once one of the Kriegsmarine's main U-boat bases. Other survivors lie in more unusual circumstances. U-534, raised from the Kattegat Strait in 1993, is now displayed in Birkenhead, England, its hull cut into sections to reveal the claustrophobic interior. Across the Atlantic, the United States preserves one emblematic submarine, U-505, captured intact in June 1944. After serving as an intelligence prize during the war, it was eventually transferred to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. There it remains today, meticulously restored, the first enemy warship ever displayed on American soil. But the majority of Germany's U-boats never reached museums. The wrecks from Operation Deadlight still line the seabed off Northwest Ireland, forming one of the world's largest underwater graveyards. For decades they were forgotten, marked only by coordinates on Royal Navy charts. Public fascination with the U-boats has only grown. Museums in Hamburg, Kiel and Labo draw thousands each year, while historians still study the tactics and lives behind the steel. For veterans and researchers alike, these submarines are more than relics, they're reminders of the human cost beneath the waves. Over 30,000 German submariners and countless Allied sailors never returned. The machines that once symbolized stealth and precision now stand for loss, innovation and remembrance. Today, the preserved boats and the wrecks below the Atlantic serve as twin memorials. One above water, one below, telling the final story of Germany's submarine fleet, an empire of steel that now rests in silence between history and the sea. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you'll also enjoy what happened to Germany's weapons and tanks after World War II. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more History Inside, and we'll see you in the next one.